You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 559, The Voyager Conspiracy.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Mike Rothschild, sitting in for Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we're just asking questions about an episode of Star Trek, trying to learn the forbidden truths they don't want you to know about its messages, morals, and meanings, and whether it stands the test of time.
This week, the Voyager Conspiracy, the one where Seven hooks herself up to the Voyager database and runs absolutely wild, connecting the dots where there may not be any dots or connections. Welcome to the show, Mike. Glad to have you here. Hey, for our audience who may not know you, I'm very excited because we get to do an episode called The Voyager Conspiracy, and you, my friend, you might have a little special insight on this.
Yes, so I'm Mike Rothschild, and I'm a journalist and author, and I cover conspiracy theories, disinformation, frauds, scams, hoaxes, essentially anything that your aunt posts about on Facebook without having read it first. It's probably something I have or will be writing about.
Very good. And you know what? I'm very happy that that particular bullet has been dodged by me and most of my family. It's only the far distant reaches, but I do still see somebody. It online. It's always somebody. Exactly. It's rare on Mission Log that we actually get to have an expert witness sit in the chair and analyze an episode. So I'm glad. Normally it's just, a couple of idiots just saying, hey, here's what I found in the episode. But
well, we'll be doing that later.
We'll be doing that, of course. Excellent. Well, glad to have you here. And if you don't mind, well, first of all, where can people find you?
So my website is themikerothschild.com, and I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at RothschildMD, and I've written a couple of books. One is called Jewish Space Lasers, about the myths about the Rothschild banking family, to whom I am sadly not related. So I cannot fund your personal pet TV projects. I'm very sorry to say.
We were going to hit you up for an ad right after the show, but
I wish. And I also wrote a book about the QAnon conspiracy theory called The Storm is Upon Us, and you can get these two books anywhere books are sold, in hardcover, ebook, audiobook. It's all out there.
Fantastic. And if you don't mind as well, tell people where to reach us.
Sure. We would love to hear from you. Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Find us on Facebook at Mission Log Pod and Threads at Roddenberry Podcasts. And the conversation always continues in the Mission Log Discord with near daily live events and 24/7 chat about the topics you love. You can get your invitation to our private server by joining at patreon.com/missionlog. And while you're at it, one of the most important ways to help the podcasts you love is to leave a 5-star rating and review at Apple or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. And remember that your comments could be used on the show, so don't troll anybody. And now here's John Champion, who did his research for this week's trivia.
Well said. All right, let's talk about the Voyager Conspiracy. We have an episode written by Joe Menosky, just a single credit here, which is pretty rare, and it isn't to say that the rest of the team didn't have their own input, but still, Joe as writer means that he gets primary story and teleplay duties. Not much more for this one beyond that bit of information. Maybe they are keeping that information from us on purpose, right? You know what I'm talking about. We have an episode directed by Terry Wendell, and you may recall that Terry had a huge career in visual effects outside of his stints in the director's chair. We first met him in season 5 for Gravity, and the most recent of his episodes that we discussed was Survival Instinct. We'll get 6 more Voyager episodes with his name on them, and then he jumps over to Enterprise for 1 more. Now, this episode uses a lot of clips from previous Voyager episodes, though not played out in full scenes, as you might expect. And we also get some interesting one-off shots as 7 of 9 continues her trip down the rabbit hole. In fact, she's doing a fair amount of Star Trek research because some of the images that she calls up are actually from the Star Trek Encyclopedia. And I always love it when non-canon sources get used in an episode. Let's meet our guest stars. Just one guest star, in addition to our frequently recurring Naomi Wildman, played, of course, as always, by Scarlett Palmers. The alien Tosh is played by Albie Selznick. Now, we've met Albie a couple of times before, and it's interesting enough that he has had a pretty full career as an actor on the large and small screens. I mean, his debut was in the straight-up classic Xanadu in 1980. But in addition to being an actor, Albie is known for his physical work. He's a choreographer, a movement artist, and has played in a number of demanding roles. On Star Trek, he brought a little of that talent the first time we saw him in TNG in Cost of Living, where he played the juggler. A few years later, we saw him again on Voyager in the third season episode Macrocosm. So far, this episode is his last Star Trek credit.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant. I hope nobody's head explodes in this conspiracy, mainly because nobody wants to clean that up afterward.
Prologue. Naomi waits in Cargo Bay 2 for her weekly Kataskat game with Seven. When Seven arrives, she's all business, modifying her alcove into a cortical processing subunit, basically a way to dump a huge amount of Voyager's collected data directly into her brain. Naomi is disappointed when Seven reschedules their game, but Seven gently reminds her that this is necessary work. Act 1. Over dinner, Chakotay convinces Janeway to take Voyager on a detour toward a Class K nebula in the name of exploration. Janeway agrees, teasing him about her experimental cooking as part of the adventure. Super early in the morning, Seven abruptly ends her regeneration cycle to notify B'Elanna of suspected photonic fleas in the sensor network. A grumpy B'Elanna informs Seven that she's woken her at an ungodly hour, but the bizarre theory intrigues her. Later on the bridge, Seven's deep dive into the ship's database results in a detailed account, complete with clips, if you're watching, of how the fleas likely hitched a ride from a Talaxian spice shipment and are now nesting in the sensor relays. Tuvok acknowledges Seven's logic, and Janeway joins the investigation. She crawls through a Jeffries tube with B'Elanna and Seven to confirm the flea's presence. Sure enough, there's a whole nest thriving in the circuitry. Janeway orders B'Elanna to relocate them, preferably somewhere far from critical systems. En route to the nebula, Voyager detects graviton emissions from a station nearby. They encounter Tosh, a stranded traveler whose device, a catapult, could propel ships across space at incredible speeds. Tosh hints that Voyager could use it to shave years off their own journey. Intrigued, Janeway invites him aboard to hear the pitch, complete with visual aids in the form of Janeway's coffee service. The next morning, Seven meets Janeway in her quarters. She reveals unsettling findings. Tosh's catapult may use the same technology the caretaker employed to trap Voyager in the Delta Quadrant. Act 2. Seven explains her concerns to Janeway, how her suspicion about the catapult deepened as she linked it to a Tetryon reactor, the same technology the caretaker used. In engineering, Janeway confronts Tosh, who admits to keeping the reactor hidden to protect it from potential thieves. Janeway allows him to continue repairs, but privately lets Seven know that she's still cautious. Seven posits that something from the caretaker, a reactor, survived and asks permission from the captain to further study Voyager's records. Using logs from Voyager's encounter with the caretaker, Seven theorizes that the reactor might have been salvaged into subspace during the array's destruction. Her suspicion grows as she pieces together circumstantial evidence, including unusual tricobalt yields and a mysterious tractor beam recorded at the time. She presses Tuvok right there in front of Tom on the bridge and even questions Neelix for additional data, but doesn't get any definitive answers. Regenerating with her alcove's enhancements, Seven makes a brand new, startling realization. She calls Chakotay to astrometrics and, after sealing the room, tells him Voyager's arrival in the Delta Quadrant wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated by Janeway. Act 3. Chakotay listens as Seven lays out her theory in excruciating detail, stardates and all. She claims Janeway destroyed the caretaker's array not to protect the Ocampa, but to ensure Voyager remained stranded. According to Seven, the destruction allowed Starfleet to gather intelligence on the Delta Quadrant, setting the stage for a potential Federation and Cardassian expansion. Seven backs up her accusations with circumstantial evidence: the tractor beam during their raised destruction, tricobalt weapons conveniently on hand, and Janeway's subsequent alliances with the Borg and many other species. Chakotay is skeptical, but shaken by the detailed story. Meanwhile, Tosh has been successful with his own initial use of the catapult, only heightening Janeway's excitement to forge ahead. Concerned, Chakotay heads to engineering and instructs B'Elanna to engage in a little subtle sabotage, and no, Janeway doesn't know about it. Act 4. When Chakotay explains Seven's theories to B'Elanna, she thinks it's a joke, but soon enough, she's on board, at least enough to slow things down. Seven's next regeneration cycle brings new revelations, this time pointing suspicion toward Chakotay and the Maquis. She confronts Janeway in astrometrics, accusing Chakotay of using the array to advance a Maquis agenda, which, with Tuvok's help, would have seen the Maquis take down Starfleet and the Cardassians. Janeway, of course, destroyed the array, but Tuvok hid his tracks and saved the Tetrion reactor for Tosh. Janeway dismisses Seven's arguments at first, but then Seven does her thing and unleashes a torrent of specific stardates and events. She even mentions Seska and the whole thing, and we all thought we were done with Seska. Janeway is overwhelmed and, just maybe, starting to doubt Chakotay. Act 5. Seven's paranoia of everyone around her reaches its zenith when she interrogates Naomi, accusing her of being a spy for either Janeway or Chakotay. Frightened, Naomi takes off. Now attempting to escape what she believes is the ultimate conspiracy to capture and dissect her, Seven steals the Delta Flyer. But Janeway beams aboard and confronts her, calmly walking through Seven's fears and making an emotional connection. She reassures Seven that the crew's only conspiracy was to help her rediscover her humanity. Exhausted but convinced, Seven returns to Voyager for treatment. The catapult successfully launches Voyager a few years closer to home. Later, Seven tells Naomi the importance of taking things slow, whether playing Kadaskat or learning new information. Later at dinner again, Janeway and Chakotay share a moment about how they doubted each other, and they resolve to never lose that trust again. The end. All right, we made it. I think I still trust you enough to go through the observations. You know, I'm just not. I'm keeping a healthy dose of skepticism and suspicion here.
Your third eye is somewhat decalcified, but
Right.
We'll see if we can get all the way there.
Exactly. So, first of all, I love anybody who walks into my office from now on. I'm just going to say, state your purpose here.
Yeah,
I love Seven.
Yeah. The bluntness is just like no time for nonsense.
Yeah.
What do we got?
Her brevity is wonderful. Look, I love the way that Star Trek has decided to write children at this point. You know, we had some false starts with Wesley, for sure.
Yeah.
Jake, I think, mostly has great moments. Every now and then, one that's not so great. Naomi, really well written. Again, where the hell is your mother?
You know, free-range parenting is apparently all the rage in the 24th century. I don't know what parenting bloggers of the Star Trek era will write about, but
they would say it takes a village or it takes a starship. Yeah,
takes a starship to let your child roam free.
Yeah,
in the hallways, getting up to whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Also, aesthetics are irrelevant. My motto for my 20s.
Oh, very good.
Yep.
Yeah, very good line there.
I love the title of this episode, The Voyager Conspiracy. I mean, it really sounds like a Robert Ludlum or like a Clive Cussler novel.
Yeah, it's kind of perfect. And I would think that Joe Menosky probably absolutely had that kind of thing in mind to phrase it like that. Yeah. I do love, the warning from the replicator, the plate is hot, which, first of all, if you're the one programming the replicator, you would probably know that anyway, like, because you had to make the plate hot. but I do like that attention to detail.
Well, and the idea, Janeway says, I've been slaving over the replicator program for hours. What do these people think cooking is?
I know.
What
right?
Like, what exactly is the sequence of events here with the meal?
Right.
Did she replicate the ingredients? I mean, it's just something got missed there, I feel like.
I get the impression that, okay, their version of cooking is you basically replicate everything halfway done, and then you replicate the other thing halfway done, and you put those two things together. Look, I cooked.
That's just overly complicated.
Yeah. Oh, it was so hard. I had to say so many words.
Yeah.
And I had to look at so many databases.
I had to think about what I wanted.
Yeah, right. But they do have space plates.
Yes.
Really glad to see space plates.
Yeah. And I couldn't tell what it was that they were eating. I know the food is your thing, but I had no idea
It
what
was
they were
really
actually
weird
doing.
because then they talk about switching over to the main course, and I was like, was that a salad at first? Because it kind of looked like a casserole. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the amber spice. I wonder if that was a Dune reference.
Yeah, it was definitely photogenic. Yep.
Yes. Photonic fleas, Yeah. Are there photonic flea circuses?
There might be. They were pretty active when we saw them.
They were.
Which was
a lot of them.
great.
With some spider webbing, too.
Yeah. That was a good little effect. And photonic fleas, I'm claiming it now. That is my Red Hot Chili Peppers cover band. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, you got that.
Yeah.
I really like, when they're going up into the Jeffries tube and they're kind of in that vertical corridor where they're going up there. So it's a great set piece, and you have the floor plate closing under B'Elanna as she crosses up the ladder, right? Okay, but all right, in real life, like if Voyager was real, absolutely makes sense. Metal deck plating, boom, that thing closes, it's solid, you're good to go. In production world on Earth in the 20th century, those things are made out of plywood, and it's a stagehand operating off camera. And I just thought I would be very nervous to then.
Why you need a good crew.
Yeah, put my foot down on that.
Yeah, that effect was really cool. That fisheye lens, very late '90s rap video. Or, like something you'd maybe see in the X-Files. I'm sure the X-Files is going to come up a couple more times, but I like that effect.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the catapult itself. Like, first of all, I think it's a great idea, and they executed it very well with the digital model that they present to us. And then I thought Tasha's makeup was really good too. Like,
he's a really distinctive looking alien. There's a lot about him with just his look and the hand motions.
Yeah,
it felt like there was a history there. We didn't necessarily need to know about it, but somebody thought about it at least.
Yeah,
and I liked that
for real.
I liked Tasha's reference to wooden sleds. Yeah, apparently those are universal for all sentient life forms.
He watched Citizen Kane. Yeah,
apparently, whatever the Tosh version of Rosebud. Sorry, spoiler.
Spoiler for a 90-year-old movie.
90-year-old movie. Hey, you never know. Also, I love that Torres is just all in immediately on the catapult. She's super excited about it, which is nice. I really liked her reaction to it.
I keep my eye on B'Elanna because it was such a watershed event, her sort of spiritual purging in Barge of the Dead. Yeah. So I keep watching now thinking like, oh, is she going to be more settled, more relaxed in herself now? And I feel like this is another example of her being her and not just walking around with this huge chip on her shoulder and being burdened by her Klingonness.
Yeah, it's cool to see somebody in the future getting excited about a new piece of tech. I thought it was a nice little moment.
Yep.
The idea of this reactor being from the caretaker and Janeway is just like immediately, I do not want another encounter with the caretaker. But since the caretaker zapped you there, maybe at least sort of hear it out.
Well, right.
Which I guess they do later, but it just seems like very much like, I don't want another encounter with the caretaker. Maybe just like have a better encounter with the caretaker. I don't know.
That's the thing, that the caretaker was not entirely unreasonable. They were catching the caretaker at the end of his life.
Right.
And that's not to say that they couldn't have, like you just said, a better encounter.
Love the clips. It's nice to see clips.
Yeah.
Like one of those things that we sort of forgot about with TV, where we don't need to just have the previously on whatever. We can have some clips, like it's old school TV. It's nice to see that,
and blended very well here because we have things that are in context, like in universe, where you go, oh, okay, Seven's looking at multiple screens and astrometrics, which look great. Okay, there was some sort of recording of that, or the computer can interpolate an image based on data. I get all of that. And then for the things that are like just Seven kind of explaining to another character, Well, those clips are not happening in universe, but they are there for our convenience. So it actually works. You don't have to, because I get into my head, I'm like, well, wait, where was the camera at the time? You know, but this all works out very nicely. I love Seven being confrontational with Tuvok. I love seeing their logical minds push each other back. And you know, if I could put this on a T-shirt, just Tuvok with the finger raised saying speculation is not evidence, because he is right. Their logic off was really cool. I like to see the two of them kind of bounce off each other, because I think they're really similar in a lot of ways. Though I guess maybe, thinking ahead a little bit, like the idea of Tuvok being in on the conspiracy, theoretically Vulcans can't lie, but he was also undercover. And I don't remember enough from Caretaker to think about, did they ever kind of resolve that little in-universe issue, or is it just like, well, it was his mission and he's not lying, he's just sort of carrying out the mission in a different way? That is exactly it. They address it, but they don't linger on that very long. Maybe they could have resolved a lot of that if Tuvok had just mind melded with Seven. But maybe he can't, because maybe there's too much Borg data floating around in her head. I did notice some food, though, because when we go to the mess hall, I love Neelix just has stuff out. And the things that I noticed, definitely a big bowl of jalapeno peppers. And some other, I think there was some red and yellow peppers around in another bowl. And maybe just some very weirdly shaped tomatoes. I noticed. Did you notice that? Maybe some bell peppers. Also, in the background, I thought I saw, and this is disgusting, but some strawberries under a heat lamp, or some sort of like I don't even know. I don't know. I'll stick to the replicator. It's you know what? I would not put it past Neelix to put strawberries under a heat lamp. However, if you were the set designer, if you were the person responsible for the props that day, the last thing you want to do is put strawberries under a heat lamp. Talk after the microphone. Talk about photonic fleas. Yes. Of course, Neelix immediately is just all in on this conspiracy and is like, I'll help you out. Here's my sensor data. Love that Kes mentions. I didn't so much love the kind of leering a little bit when he was talking about Kes. And kind of smugly saying, she had quite an imagination. I don't know. Doesn't play very well these days. Agreed. And maybe this is just sort of an artifact of, we're in the streaming era and we're all used to sort of watching shows without commercials, but the act breaks are really, really well placed in this episode. There's just nice stingers at the end. It just really keeps you going for what happens next. I think it reminds us of something we've lost a little bit with the 8-hour movie approach to TV. Yes. Episodic TV has a structure, and when you do it right, it really works. Yeah. Every now and then it's really conspicuous when you get to the end of an act and you realize, like, they just ran out of steam, so now they're going to do a fade out. But when the punch is just right, it really does carry you to the next act, and that's cool to see. I like the conspiracy getting deeper and weirder, and this idea of collusion with the Caretaker and the Cardassians to establish a military presence. It's wonderful stuff. More to be said there. What is the Jankata Treaty, the Jankata Accord? Is this something that the Cardassians signed given their alliance with the Dominion? I believe who were invading the Alpha Quadrant? I think one of our DS9 listener experts can definitely chime in there, but yes. And again, this is, I don't remember all that much from Caretaker, but everyone's so shocked that a Cardassian warship would have been pulled in by the Caretaker before Voyager, but the Caretaker was grabbing ships from the Badlands. There were Cardassian ships in the Badlands. It's one of those things where it's interesting, but it wouldn't shock me if another Cardassian ship got pulled in and then sent back, and then Voyager wouldn't theoretically know about it. Oh, sure. Yeah. I like Chakotay's line to Seven. He says, I can believe the Cardassians might be involved in something like this, but not Starfleet. And I just thought, dear sweet Chakotay, you have so much to learn, like Section 31. We'll start there and then move forward. I like the tricobalt devices and the tractor beam. I like that there's actual sort of real life mysteries that are then wrapped
around this bigger conspiracy, because most conspiracy theories work like that. They have a small thing that's real and that doesn't really have an explanation, and then they sort of load it down with bigger things. And I think this is something that this episode does really well, is Seven pulling all these details out of thin air. It was carried by a series of ships. Chakotay was, handsomely compensated Tosh. I mean, she doesn't know any of that. But these are the kinds of sort of irrelevant but really verbose and compelling details that actually make conspiracy theories more believable. If you get into this literature, and I don't recommend anyone do that ever, but there are very few short conspiracy theory books anymore. Some of the older ones are, but a lot of the big conspiracy gurus, it's like they're putting out 1,000-page books every year, and there are so many details that you just give up on trying to debunk it. You just sort of move on. I think this gets it really right with that.
Yeah. Actually, I've got a note about that in a little bit that I'll probably come back to ask you about. Yeah. And the initial reaction here is just Chakotay saying, your interpretation is far-fetched, which is the maybe polite way of pushing back at first, saying, this is nuts.
Yeah, he pushes back and then he doesn't. And one of the things about this is that, like, the more she talks, the more he starts to believe her, which I have some thoughts about, and we can get into that later. I do like when Seven's going through all of the sort of circumstantial evidence. She mentions a couple of things that we saw, and then she mentions one thing we didn't see.
Yes.
So it's a nice variation on that Star Trek thing of, we're going to mention 2 real playwrights and then one playwright from Vulcan from the 23rd century. It's always nice little thing.
Yeah, you can always fill in Garlock as Zebulon 4. And,
that's right.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this more later, but like Chakotay believing this might have made sense given everything that happened during Equinox, but we don't mention that at all. So again, something we'll come back to. But my hackle started getting up a little bit.
I think one thing that we may land on this or not, but I think one thing in an episode like this is that you have to compress the time quite a bit, and then therefore you're compressing the way characters react. So Absolutely. If the idea is, okay, you take a guy like Chakotay who doesn't believe this, we have to get him to a point where he does believe it, at least enough to be suspicious of Janeway. All right, in real life, that might take months.
Right.
But here we got to make that happen in minutes,
Yeah.
But I hopefully the journey, even if it is quite a bit compressed, hopefully that part of it is correct,
Yeah. It can be. And, people certainly can be radicalized overnight.
Yeah.
It takes a certain type of person and a certain type of information. And, not sure we quite get there, but.
Hey, we were talking about Tasha's makeup earlier. I love his thumbs up. that elongated, cool prosthetic.
That was cool. I love those motions. Just Tuvok is just ice cold about Tasha. Like, if his ship survived, we'll hear from him in 2 hours. If he's not dead, giving it out.
Right, right.
just not messing around at all. Get the telemetry to engineering. Got to put it on an iPad that gets handed to somebody and hand delivered.
Yep.
Would have been an email.
That's the way it works. It's interesting to me that Chakotay still assumes that B'Elanna's loyalty is to him and not the captain. So if Chakotay is going to go to anybody, he's going to go to B'Elanna. And he's still working that kind of angle like, hey, we're in this together. We were in the Maquis together. I mean, he doesn't come right out and say that, but that's the implication. Not assuming that B'Elanna might just say, this is far-fetched.
Yeah. I don't know what a Borg practical joke is. I don't think I want to know. No. I think it maybe is being assimilated with a whoopee cushion.
Yeah.
Chakotay saying that Seven has compelling evidence. Does she?
Right.
I mean, delivered in a 2-minute monologue.
She has a lot of words. Is that really compelling evidence? We'll find out. I thought B'Elanna is actually being really reasonable in trying to talk Chakotay down a bit and make him explore possibilities here. And then I also love the interruption, and it's like, not now, Harry. Like
Harry just kind of strolls up. I'm here to work on the shield.
Yeah, no.
All right, I'll go.
We don't want you, Harry.
Yeah.
And then I love how this conspiracy switches suspicion about Chakotay and the Maquis, but then Seven confides in Janeway. I wonder in Seven's head, is Chakotay no longer under suspicion, or is she just trying to marry these two disparate ideas in her head? It's a moment that is very fast, and it indicates that every time she hooks herself up to regeneration, obviously new information comes in, and the I guess the conspiracy circuitry gets completely rewired in her head.
Yeah, and it's another thing that I think this gets really right is the ability to hold completely conflicting beliefs at the same time. It's this cognitive dissonance that you really need to be a conspiracy theorist. There's a lot of studies about, holding two completely two beliefs that would totally cancel each other out. There was a study that found a number of people who both believed that Osama bin Laden had been killed years before the raid on his compound and was also still alive.
Oh my gosh.
And you're just like,
wow.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
But you do, and you just talk yourself into whatever corner you need to figure that out. And I think it's really well done how Seven does that.
Wow.
That wild-eyed look that she has is something I have seen in a lot of YouTube videos of people rambling into their phones sitting in their car. Very, very familiar.
Yeah.
And well done. Janeway, I think she has the right initial reaction to it. But again, she starts to go along with it. I know you're talking about, you need to compress the time. You don't have the time to really go into this. But this is something that, like, she's a scientist.
Yeah.
You would think that this is maybe not something she's going to get caught up in.
Right.
I don't know why she's willing to consider this. And I guess that's what the rest of the episode is. And I did notice she mentions that, Chakotay gave up his allegiance to the Maquis. And, she says there's nobody on this ship that she trusts more than Chakotay, except 2 months ago when you fired him.
Yeah, you didn't agree with me, so I demoted you. Yeah. I really feel like as we get to the end here, the emotional crescendo is there and really typified by Seven turning against the people who are closest to her, not just Janeway, but Naomi. And that's really nice dramatic bookending for the episode to show, like, this is how far gone Seven is.
It really gets that right.
Yeah. And I love the showdown between Janeway and Chakotay. I love them kind of finding each other and feeling each other out a bit, like, maybe you're doing this, or maybe you're doing this. Oh, we're both being played,
The whispery voices and it felt very stylized.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a leap that they're both sort of packing heat and accusing each other of things. But then they both realize, oh, wait a minute, this has gone completely haywire.
Yeah. And they would say it, same evidence, two theories. So they realize what's going on here. Yeah.
Yeah, they do realize it. And, that is how conspiracism works. I mean, you hear one thing and you go, oh, okay, what about all these other things? Sometimes people snap out of it and sometimes people don't.
Yeah. There is this moment after Janeway and Chakotay realize what's going on. And Janeway says to Chakotay, let's keep this one out of the logs, huh? So I thought, okay, yeah, but now that will be fodder for a new conspiracy. The gap in the logs, we don't talk about that. Yeah,
it's the 18 minutes from the Nixon tapes,
right?
And like, why would you have a captain's log if you're going to just decide what stuff to keep out of it? Oh, I guess Cisco did that with. But
shots fired.
Feels like the stakes are a little bit lower here.
Yeah. And again, I think it's important actually to record, we got fooled by this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how the conspiracy switches again, tragically so, because again, the emotional part of this, the personal investment in this is about Seven herself. And she is just completely paranoid at this point. It's really tragic. Yeah.
Really like the whole final scene with Janeway and Seven. Don't think she should have taken the phaser with when she beamed on. It's not a good look.
Yeah, it's the whole Yeah, we come in peace.
Yeah, I'm here to talk you down. Oh, but I'm armed, just
Yeah.
in case. Not a good look.
Well, once we get the phaser out of the way, it is a really lovely, touching scene between these two. Again,
It's really
this
nice.
commonality. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she really does it. Janeway really explains the appeal of this stuff really well. And I think one of the interesting things is that Seven doesn't have the critical thinking skills to discern what is signal and what is noise here. And I think it's a really nice articulation of how to get somebody out of these kinds of movements is just, reiterate your shared bonds and your shared experiences and how much you care for the other person. Although I was looking through Memory Alpha after I watched the episode, and some of the star dates are wrong.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't quite know why.
Yeah. Huh. All right. Well, somebody must have gone back through and changed history a bit, trying to throw you
I
off
guess
the
so.
trail.
It's a different
Yeah.
timeline. Yeah.
As they are in the Delta Flyer and they have this moment of reconciliation, then Janeway says, 2 to beam out. Who's flying the shuttle back?
What?
Yeah. Come on. So there's this great line, 7 was malfunctioning. We don't have that excuse. Very good scene at the end. And we honestly, I feel like we have too few of these with Janeway and Chakotay just personally. And no, I'm not talking to you shippers. I just mean them personally sitting there at dinner talking about just their day. And, it harkens back to Picard and Beverly also not talking to you shippers. Just sitting, just talking, just being people. I wish we had more of that. Did we ever account for the unidentified tractor beam?
We never accounted for the tractor beam or why the ship launched from DS9 with tricobalt devices. One of those things where I feel like it could have easily been explained with one line of dialogue. And I think the tractor beam kind of was. Like, we can't tell what it is.
Yeah.
And you get that a lot in conspiracy theories where you see an image and you decide that you know what it is because it looks like other versions of that. So the tractor beam, I feel like, okay, maybe we're just not going to know what it is. Maybe it's a sensor ghost or something. But the tri-cobalt device, like there would be a reason why Voyager would have these. It feels like just sort of a dropped thread of never explaining it.
If you've ever wondered what the verbal equivalent of a conspiracy board with push pins and strings sounds like, well, you just heard it.
John and Bonnie here.
Bonnie, we only have 1 minute to promo.
Trek Talks 4, January 18th, 10 a.m., 6 p.m. Pacific Time, live on YouTube.
An 8-hour digital fundraiser come convention without pants to benefit Hollywood Food Coalition.
Trek guests out the wazoo like Kate Mulgrew and Bob Picardo.
Nana visitor Brandon Braga, Ira Bear, Brian Fuller.
Uniqua Martin Green, Wilson Cruz, Doug Jones.
It's an hour-long Discovery Cast reunion.
You know it is. And Mike McMahon, Don Lewis, and Gabrielle Rees anchoring a Lower Decks panel.
We're running out of time. Talk faster, Bonnie.
Yeah, a tribute to Jerry Taylor, Women of Science, guys who write Trek novels, musical interludes, amazing silent auction items, Rod Roddenberry.
That and so much more to benefit an amazing organization, Hollywood Food Coalition, helping people in need in a bajillion ways.
January 18th, 10 to 6 Pacific. Find us on YouTube. Go to TrekTalks.net for more info on Trek Talk 4.
1 minute on the nose. I'm exhausted.
So, Mike, I want to come back to 2 things that we touched on in the last segment that stuck out to me because they were already in my notes, actually. And I'm glad that you brought them up because I wanted to see if there was a little bit more space to dig a little deeper. And this was this moment that Seven's conspiracy switches from Janeway under her suspicion to Chakotay under her suspicion. And you brought up an example about Osama bin Laden, and I had heard a similar thing about conspiracy believers who simultaneously hold other contradictory positions, like Princess Diana's death was staged and the royal family had her killed. Like they believe this. So, and you said the phrase that pays, you said the magic words, which were cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
I understand cognitive dissonance, but I don't understand it to that level where you can literally have things that, like, say the words that are obviously contradictory. Like, they do not exist in the same space.
Right. It is inherently a way of trying to make sense out of things that don't make any sense. It's a way of finding purpose in things that seem chaotic. And that's really where conspiracy theories come from. And there's a reason why certain events continue to drive conspiracism, because they aren't supposed to happen, but they did happen. So we need to reconcile something that happened that wasn't supposed to happen. So that's why the Kennedy assassination continues to drive conspiracy theories, because it wasn't supposed to happen. And if it happened, well, it couldn't have happened like that. There has to be something bigger. There has to be a plot. It couldn't just be this one guy who took advantage of a very specific set of circumstances. There has to be more to it. And I think what we see with Seven, and the part of this episode I think works the best, is her trying to take all of this information that doesn't fit together and try to make it fit together because she thinks that it has to. And I think there is a very human trait to need an answer when sometimes there just isn't one, or there's just not one we like.
Well, and Janeway has that specific line, which actually echoes what the Borg Queen said to Seven, which is that you were trying to bring order to chaos.
Right.
And that kind of says it all right there. But, you would also think that the logical mind of Borg would not be able to hold. It's sort of, I picture Kirk talking down a computer with logic, saying okay, these two things that you believe cannot coexist because they directly contradict each other. And if it were just a computer, it would explode and smoke would be pouring out of it. But it's Seven, and Seven has an emotional life as well, and human needs as well. So this sort of fits. She makes it fit, even when it doesn't.
You make
fit.
It fit together.
Yeah.
You make it fit, and any details that don't jive with what you are trying to put together, you either discard them or you change them around enough so that they do fit. And it's a kind of logic that most people just don't go that deep, but we're all really capable of it if we find the right piece of information and it hits us in the right way at the right time. And I think that's what's happening with Seven, is just too much info is hitting her and she just can't discern what matters and what doesn't.
I wanted to ask you about Seven's monologues, because she's wonderful. Jerry is wonderful, pacing around the room and just, detail after detail, stardate after stardate, whether they are correct or not. But is she doing, because I love this phrase, is she doing Gish Gallop arguing, where just throwing out so many details that nobody can refute them all?
Right. That's exactly what she's doing.
Okay.
I think it's done really well, where she's, what about this? What about this? What about this? Mm-hmm. To the point where most people just don't want to engage with that. And that's why I don't do debates, because I don't want to engage with somebody in a way where they continue to pull out claims that are irrelevant or not real. I am stuck, debating based on the truth. And the conspiracy theorist just can create whatever they want to.
Right.
And then the cadence continues to pick up, and it gets faster and more almost more addictive as you keep finding more things that confirm that you're correct. It is really the way that these people debate and see the world. And I think it's quite accurate.
I think Seven also typifies something else, which is that a lot of people who are drawn into conspiracy theories or a conspiracy enthusiast, they're often very smart, because they are good at absorbing information, putting that information together, using logic to try to back up. Now, they might be doing it backwards, where they're trying to use their skills of logic and information to back up a conclusion that they have already come up with, that's already attractive to them. But they're doing those things, and they're using those skills to counter any arguments that might bump up against them. So it works here that the smartest person on the ship is the one who is taken in by this conspiracy, multiple conspiracies.
Yeah, it really does work. She is in many ways the smartest person on the ship, but she's also the person who is theoretically the most vulnerable to conspiracism because she has not developed the critical thinking skills and the discernment to be able to separate out, well, here's a bunch of things that happened. Maybe some of these things are coincidences, but that doesn't mean they're all linked together. And there are certain things we don't know. That doesn't mean that they're part of this conspiracy. There's just some things that we don't know. Again, that's where, something like an explanation for why Voyager had the tricobalt devices would have been helpful for the episode, because it actually would have sort of backed up how you can take something true and turn it into something false. This is one of those things that just kind of nagged at me a little bit, but so much of Seven's journey down the rabbit hole is so prescient to what I have seen many, many times in conspiracy communities. And I think it's a really good example of Star Trek being really proactive about a social issue. I think even before it's a social issue.
All right. Well, let's talk about that being a social issue then, because I was trying to think about, all right, this episode came out at a time that the internet was, truly, this is like right on the edge of being mainstream and in everybody's home and later in everybody's pocket and just widespread. And if you remember way back in those heady days of the late 90s, the internet had this promise of kind of like TV, when TV first started to get ubiquitous in the 50s. Like, here is this technology that can bring the world to you. It can bring all the education and information instantly to you, so you can find out anything. Okay, so now here's Seven. Seven is us, because Seven has got all the information possible available right there at her fingertips, and she assimilates it. Just like we all do, getting on our phones and going to Google or Wikipedia or whatever, you can just assimilate all the information that you want all the time. But she doesn't put it together the right way. And I think, there but for the grace of God go I. I'm trying to understand, what is the real world analog for this? What mistakes is Seven making that we all make, and to the greater extreme that conspiracy enthusiasts make? What's happening there?
Yeah, it's taking in too much information too quickly about too many different things. You see this with, sometimes people have these kind of overnight radicalization experiences, where somebody sends them a video about, Big Pharma or something, and you watch that, and it's kind of interesting to you, and you've had similar thoughts, and the algorithm recommends something else that's a little bit like that, and you watch that one too. And they're all kind of short, and you can consume a lot of them. The algorithm sends you another one, and it's just doing its job. And before you know it, you've gone from, Big Pharma is not our best friend, to hardcore Holocaust denial in 15 YouTube videos, and you've been up all night, and suddenly you feel like the scales have fallen off your eyes. And that's not going to happen to most people, because most people don't have the time or the inclination to do something like that. But if you are a person who's isolated, if you've had a setback, if you're feeling like maybe you don't fit in your community, things aren't going well, that is a person who is extremely vulnerable to that kind of fire hose of information. And I think it's why Seven is so vulnerable. She's a person who is used to having everything at her fingertips, but the hive mind figures it all out for you. She's only really been a person for a couple of years.
Right.
And that is really scary. And you don't have somebody making decisions for you. You don't have somebody to say, that doesn't matter, that's irrelevant. This is relevant. Being Borg is all about what's irrelevant and what's relevant. And now it's like you're just adrift for yourself and you have no idea. And that is a scary thing that happens to people. And it happens more now because information travels so quickly with so little vetting. This idea that we were all going to have the Library of Alexandria in our pocket. Well, it turned out to be a magazine rack at a truck stop.
Yeah.
And we're all on our own here.
Yeah. So I mentioned a moment ago, we're kind of talking about late late 90s. This came out in 1999. And yes, of course, I want to correct myself here. The internet was there, but it still took a little bit of time for it to just be everywhere the way it is certainly now. But what else can we kind of discern from the timing of this episode? By the way, pre 9/11, which I think also our world and our view of assimilating important political information and i.e. conspiracies also changed again at that point.
Yeah, 9/11 was obviously a huge driver of conspiracism, and it really changed the way a lot of people consumed information. You're starting to have high-speed internet. You're starting to have more easily shot video. You're starting to see more people with cell phones. I think maybe very early cameras in phones. But for the Voyager conspiracy, this aired in November of 1999. This is a pop culture moment for conspiracism. You certainly had the X-Files. The X-Files movie had just come out. You had a lot of films about conspiracies. You had JFK. You had the Mel Gibson movie Conspiracy Theory. You also had a lot of films about technology run amok. You had things like The Matrix, which had come out pretty recently. And I don't know if anybody on the Voyager writing staff ever talked about, were they influenced by something like the X-Files? Was this an attempt to kind of tap into that? And I think there's a lot of ways that this story really could have been the X-Files with phasers. But
Right.
and it kind of verges on that for a moment. But it really tackles a problem that I think nobody was really taking seriously. Conspiracy believers were weirdos. They were cranks. They were, to quote the line from Annie Hall, the guy in the surgical mask pushing the shopping cart screaming about socialism. They were not people who were taken seriously.
Yeah.
And of course now they're everywhere. Everybody knows somebody who's been pulled in by one of these things.
Yeah.
And I think it's an almost accidental social commentary that kind of maybe emerged from this pop culture moment, but I think says a lot about what is happening right now.
Was she an Oliver Stone's throw from the truth? Or did Seven just need to calm her Borg nanoprobes down? Let's hear from our shadowy cabal of experts.
All right, Mike, between you, me, our listeners, and the prying eyes of whoever is watching and listening to every word that we say, we have made it to the end of the Voyager Conspiracy. And as we do on the show, we like to look back and reassess, figure out, does the episode hold up? And did we learn anything from today's story? Now, Mike, you know the show well enough to know that whether or not an episode holds up is a purposely loaded question because it really is truly subjective. There might be things that took you in or out of the story, or maybe certain things that elevated beyond what your expectation was. So, Mike, being our expert witness today, does the Voyager Conspiracy hold up?
It does for me because of Seven's story. I think that there's a lot of kind of TV magic at work with Chakotay and in particular Janeway buying into this whole thing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not so focused on that, but I think Seven's journey down the rabbit hole, her radicalizing, and then the effort that Janeway makes to de-radicalize her, I think it really does work, and it really speaks to something that is a huge problem right now. And it's not just that people are falling into conspiracy theories, it's that we still don't really know kind of how to deal with the people who have fallen into conspiracy theories. And I think, we know a lot more now than we did in 1999 when this came out, but the compassion that Janeway has and the reminder of the shared bonds and the shared experiences and the affection that she has for Seven and the affection Seven has for Janeway, that's a way to help people start the journey out of conspiracism. Now, of course, that person has to be willing to do that. You can't just sort of, throw a bag over somebody's head and throw them in a van and sort of de-brainwash them. We know that doesn't work. But Seven does make the choice. She understands something has gone wrong here. And Janeway is there to help her kind of take those first steps. So I think in illustrating that, I think it holds up remarkably well at a time when I think conspiracism was still just weirdos and, antisocial misfits. And of course, we've even seen that a little bit on Voyager. I think about the militia dudes in Future's End, who are just sort of cartoonishly, like Timothy McVeigh light types.
Yeah.
We've come a long way since then in this show. And I think it's handled with a sensitivity and a grace that I think really can and should be replicated in modern entertainment.
Yeah. Well said. And I think that really is what you're describing is when Star Trek is at its best, but it's also just when a piece of narrative fiction is at its best. So you have this core idea, something that is relevant and important, somebody who is victim to these bad ideas, who is taken in by conspiracy ideas. But how do you tell that story? Well, you tell it in a way that is emotionally compelling about characters that we care about. And that's where this is really strong, because you have great performances all around, which is kind of redundant for us to say at this point, because Voyager is a show that is firing on all cylinders. And even though I constantly beat the drum that we don't get enough out of this character or that character or whomever, but when we do get great stuff out of the characters that we are focused on, like Seven, like Janeway, like the Doctor, but in this case in particular, Seven and Janeway, played by two very strong actors who really understand the emotional weight of what's going on here, not just the kind of fun with conspiracies,
Yeah.
That's really what it's all about. And it informs something about Seven's relationship to her crew. So I think that's where this fits in very nicely with Voyager's overall story. But back to the main point here, this came out at a time where the topic was also relevant, and the topic maintains its relevance a quarter century later as of this recording of the podcast. I will say that from a production standpoint, we mentioned this before, that this is a fun way to incorporate clips without actually doing a clip show. Looking at you, Shades of Grey, that, it works. It works from a narrative storytelling tool that they get to exercise here. You mentioned something else that really fired up my thoughts, which is you mentioned kind of the pop culture meme of conspiracy theorists or conspiracy stories. And of course, the X-Files is the big one. But you mentioned movies like The Matrix and the movie Conspiracy Theory. And the thing that always drives me insane about stories like that is that when you're doing a piece of pop culture, the thing that is fictional has to be real for the movie or for the story to work. There aren't any great stories about that thing being false. And our heroes just having to make a personal journey to exorcise themselves of these bad ideas. And that's what we get here. Like, that's kind of a revelation because,
it is.
It's
for Seven to be able to say, I was wrong. Sorry. It doesn't necessarily make for like the great ending of a movie, but it's a much more real and personal way to conclude this story.
Yeah, and Janeway and Chakotay too, saying, hey, we got taken in by this thing, and it wasn't real, but that was our fault. It was our fault for not doing our due diligence here and kind of losing our heads in the fantasy of it all for a moment. I make the same comparison with horror movies. Horror movies, even though you typically have the token skeptic, or even though you start the story with the premise that what's going on here isn't real, well, by the time you get to the final act, that thing has to be real. And the possession has to be real, or the whatever it is.
The ghost.
The ghosts, they have to be real. And that's the way that horror movies work. There aren't any where it's just, although I would still argue that The Witch, I think, is still a psychological drama. But that is a very rare exception where you get to say to the audience, like, no, this is all just the thing that's happening with the characters. There isn't this external force. So way to do a compelling story with great character work, great drama. Stay true to the theme here, which is about the conspiracy, but actually make it a much more personal and much more relevant story. So holds up quite nicely. And that would bring us to our morals, meanings, messages. And there are a couple of moments here that I think are really important. One is the lesson that Seven imparts to Naomi Wildman. And you, my friend, has talked about it a little while ago in our discussion, which is about slowing down. We have the deluge of information, and our brains are tricked into pursuing more and more and more of that information to the point that we can't make good decisions about the quality of information. Seven says it. Quantity is less relevant than quality. You must be able to interpret the data and enjoy the process. Now, easier said than done, of course, but that is certainly an important lesson here. And then the other lesson, you have had a professional career doing this and trying to debunk and explain and hopefully steer people into better decision-making and better understanding about the ideas that they carry around with them. But I always wonder, well, what is the way to talk to someone who walks around with these beliefs? And at the end, Captain Janeway comes out on top here. I hesitate to say win, because we're really in an emotional battle here, but she is able to break through because of an emotional appeal. She relates to Seven on this true emotional bond that she has with her. So then I kind of ask, well, do logical and fact-based arguments against conspiracy not work? And I hope that the answer is that they do work as well. But I think there's an important lesson here about the emotional connection that has to be there, maybe in order for those things to work.
Yeah, I think the idea of, does logic work? Does debunking work? Does it get through to anybody? I think it's something that we're really struggling with right now in the field of journalism and media and expertise is, how do we even approach this? Yeah. And I think, at least for me, it's not so much about kind of going through and fact-checking everything. I think it's important to do that because you're leaving a historical record for people in the future or 5 minutes from now to find. But ultimately, the reason why people become driven by conspiracy theories is that there's an emotional appeal to them. They explain something. They are giving you some sort of comfort. And the only way to replace that is not with logic or facts or debunking, and certainly not with sort of insulting or belittling, but it's with human connection. And of course, that's really hard to do because conspiracy theorists are often saying things that are extremely repulsive and sometimes very hateful, sometimes very racist. And there is no requirement whatsoever to be around those people or engage with that. But, to me, the message here is that a person who has these kinds of mistaken beliefs can be helped with compassion, with reminders of a shared bond and shared experiences in a way that is safe to do. And there's certainly no requirement that a person do that. But if a believer in conspiracism feels like maybe something doesn't add up or something doesn't make sense, they're going to be looking for someone to reach a hand out, and somebody who hasn't abandoned them or just sort of left them behind. And I think Janeway in the final scene with Seven really provides that. And I think it's really well done, and it's nice to see that. I think the other real message, at least for me, is Seven is the smartest and most analytical person on Voyager. She also becomes a hardcore conspiracy theorist.
Right.
Very quickly. So the point, for me is that anybody can become a conspiracy theorist, no matter how smart you are or how educated or your economic status. If the right material, the right plot or plan hits you in the right way at a time when you're vulnerable, that could be you. And I think that's just something we all need to remember and not think that we are above it or better than it, because we might be above a lot of things, but there might be one thing that can hit us and suddenly we're up all night, with our cortical nodes plugged in and we're, mainlining information. Yeah. And I like the last little bit there with Seven where she's going to play Cot with Naomi, just log off. Log off and be around people.
Yeah.
Touch grass if it's available to you.
I love that. Log off, play a game, touch grass.
Yeah.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Pathfinder.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shadwell, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi. Sensors do not indicate the presence of any head debris outside of anyone's head. What a relief. That was a close one. And saying mind blown doesn't count. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.